Why Socialism was a short essay written in 1949 by renowned physicist Albert Einstein and published in the Socialist Journal Monthly Review. Einstein was a very influential figure, one at the very center of scientific development, and to this day is widely thought of as a founding father of modern science. He was responsible for developing critical theories such as special and general relativity, which to this day scientists are still trying to grasp the theory's impacts. However, as much as Einstein was an incredible and well-respected figure, he was certainly no student nor an expert of economic teachings. There is no mistake of this, and he admits this from the very offset. The opening line of the essay explicitly describes the reasons which one who is not an expert on economics and the social sciences have in asserting their views over such fields. But merely the fact that one is not a student of the social sciences can serve as no basis to abandon their claims, which may present a valid case. In some cases within this essay, Einstein is quite correct in his assertions. And to find a framework by which to look at society and the individual, we should start at that point. Einstein writes, "The discovery of general laws in the field of economics is made difficult by the circumstance that observed economic phenomena are often affected by many factors which are hard to evaluate separately. In addition, the experience which has accumulated since the beginning of the so-called civilized period of human history has, as is well known, been largely influenced and limited by causes which are by no means exclusively economic in nature." This is certainly true, and to undermine the truth of such claim as an Austrian economist will either be founded on dogmatism or an outright adoption of the positivistic method of the social sciences, based not on logical deduction and a priori reasoning, but instead on observation and experience. Einstein's warning not to overvalue the scientific method when it comes to human action and behavior is one that we must iterate and the modern social sciences must reflect on. The social sciences, fundamentally, are the field of human action and the human mind. It firmly relies on that which cannot be ascertained by experience, which is convoluted with so many variables that one result can never be posed as permanent. Positivistic science can never produce general and permanent laws by which to guide the core of science. It can only produce experiments that are co-founded with so many other variables that it will be found as falsified in a matter of a few seconds. The modern social sciences should find great value in heeding Einstein's warnings. Later in this essay, Einstein also writes, "The abstract concept, society, means to the individual human being the sum total of his direct and indirect relations to his contemporaries and to all the people of earlier generations. The individual is able to think, feel, strive, and work by himself, that he depends so much upon society in his physical, intellectual, and emotional existence that it is impossible to think of him or to understand of him outside the framework of society. The history of society is one in which a small congregation of peoples influence each other through their behaviors and practices. Each of these individuals adopts an other's practices, without concisely doing so or determining any such way that it would benefit his own ends. Yet the behaviors which they adopt are only the ones which survive among a variety of competition of others' practices. They must survive and evolve. In this way, the concept of a society is the spontaneous and unconscious adoption of cultural rules that binds one's thoughts, value judgments, and way of life. Just as in the modern age, Europeans and Americans cannot understand the Middle Eastern or African cultural rules and ways of life, so too is this eternal social rule applicable throughout all of history, even to the smallest units, such as the family or tribes. Society is determined by both its parts and the interrelationships between those component parts. It cannot function without the relationships to make such things flow. Cooperation, even if not for ultimate altruistic ends, is necessary for a functioning civilization. The individual is bound by society, just as much as society is bound by the individuals internal to it. Einstein's descriptions of society and methodology are, for the most part, correct. The flaw in his reasoning comes in what he describes as the relationship of the individual to society. He reasons that in the development of civilization, men have become increasingly dependent upon its aid, and this is not to be viewed as a positive asset, rather a threat to his natural rights. This can, in a sense, be true, but it is not inherently so. Civilizations in general have been the greatest development and achievement of mankind. It is not a product that was consciously and directly designed according to one absolute plan. Rather, it is the product of a great many people over history with varying concepts and ideas. Man's natural rights are founded upon the fact that he is a reasoning being. He must be free from the use of force to develop his faculties and skills. If men's natural rights imply the use of coercion to be illegitimate, then communities and civilization become a direct product of their freedom. Communities and societies will always arise in the absence of coercion and force in order to maximize human ends and utilize the division of labor and knowledge to their best advantage. If an individual who specializes in farming joins others who specialize in building, machine building, etc., their mutual cooperation would greatly enhance not only their own productivity and wealth, but the productivity and wealth of all participants. Society is a natural product of liberty, and while it can come to be the greatest threat to our natural rights, as we've seen in the modern age, it is not inherently such a threat. The anarchy of capitalist production is a term used to describe the decentralized form of production. A socialist commonwealth dictates production according to one individual consciously designed planned by a central planner. The capitalist system of production is the opposite of this. It is decentralized in the formal sense. Production decisions are guided by the plans and expectations of individual producers. Yet this does not imply that the system is uncoordinated or chaotic as seen by the use of anarchy. Quite the opposite is true. A socialist system of centralized planning suffers a serious defect: the absence of exchangeability in factors of production. There exists three forms of valuation that must be accounted for when forming production decisions. First, there exist primary evaluations, which refer to the tacit subjective evaluations that are assigned to goods for final consumption. Secondly, there are consumer evaluations that refer to the technological and value efficiency of certain ends for the attainment of certain primary ends. Lastly, there are producer evaluations, which pose a critical problem for socialist planners. This refers to the economic use of high-order goods for facilitating the production process. Karl Menger understood that the value of high-order goods depends essentially on the stage of final consumption. Goods of a higher order have a fraction of the value of the final goods imputed to them according to the contribution to production. It is the role of the entrepreneurs in these markets, using the competitive bidding process to assign the correct values to high-order goods. Entrepreneurs who identify that a good can be put to more productive uses are rewarded in the market. They will assume control over this higher-order good at a less than market price and therefore attain higher returns. On the other hand, if a higher-order good is found to be overvalued, entrepreneurs will make losses as they pay a supermarket price for these goods. This will reduce their profits and tie up more funds where they could have been more productively used. The socialist planner, however, cannot use the guide of the price system. In the socialist community, all means of production are controlled by the community and therefore cannot be exchanged. It would be a contradiction in the very notion of communal ownership to assume that goods can be exchanged among owners. Due to this fact, they will be blind to establish productive relations which take into account of scarcity, primary valuation, and other vital aspects of tacit data. For a productive and rational allocation of resources to take place, it has to be based on a spontaneous system that arose out of free interaction between individuals. In a quite different direction from the so-called anarchy of production, Einstein also asserts that the free market inherently leads towards a concentration of capital. In other words, that free markets tend towards the development of oligarchies and monopolies. He writes, private capital tends to become concentrated in a few hands, partly because of the competition among the capitalists, and the result of these developments is an oligarchy of private capital, the enormous power of which cannot be effectively checked. Far from Einstein's anarchy of production, he now asserts that capitalism, or free markets, tend towards one large, uniform, and unitary authority, which plans production and sets monopoly prices. Modern socialists, particularly the social democrats, enjoy an easy complaint at large businesses in the highest wealth brackets. Yet the socialist plan is effectively one megacorporation, with unitary power to plan not, as in the case of monopolies, certain stages of production or specific markets, but have the power to plan every stage of production and market. Central planning boards are the monopolies of monopolies. Assuming this contradiction away, the case is still not so that free markets incentivize the development of monopolies. Through the competitive pressure of the free market, economies of scale can surely develop, but they have inherent constraints to their expansion. If a business somehow attains a large market share and attempts to raise prices beyond their market price for profit, Capital will inflow into this industry, and new startups will form by alert entrepreneurs willing to sell at market price or less. This attracts customers away from monopolies, and they are forced to cut prices. The free market naturally gravitates the market towards an equilibrium. The market will never reach an exact equilibrium point, but it certainly can tend towards it. The last of the notable Einstein fallacies in his essay, Why Socialism?, is the renowned fallacy of automation. This fallacy states that due to technological improvements in the higher order stages, workers inevitably lose jobs to technology. This rhetoric is often employed by unions and socialists alike in their united goal to reduce welfare, lower living standards, develop shortages, and resort to inefficient and unnecessary techniques that make the lives of workers miserable. According to Ian Stewart, Deborah Pratt MD, and Alex Cole, since 1871, automation has been a force for job creation rather than displacing human workers. It does not replace workers, but rather shifts laborers to industries where they will more productively contribute. According to the same study, the dominant trend is of contracting employment in agriculture and manufacturing being more than offset by the rapid growth in the caring, creative, technology, and business service sectors. Machines will take on the more repetitive and laborious tasks, but seem no closer to eliminating the need for human labor than any other time in the last 150 years. Einstein's claim that technological progress frequently results in more unemployment rather than the easing of burden for the work of all is critically false, both in theory and in historical evidence. As we have seen, while an acclaimed physicist responsible for some of the world's greatest scientific achievements, the same cannot be said for his advances in economic and social theory, which reflect fundamental confusions and misunderstandings of the field. I'd like to thank Craig Duddy for his help in this video. You can check out some of his work over on the Volunteerist Haven YouTube channel and the Volunteerist Haven podcast. I'd also like to thank the patrons: Jeppy, Jackson Sepulvado, Certitade, Some Hoppian Guy, William Nunnery Jr., and Monolithic Ethos. If you would like to support me on Patreon, I will leave a link to that in the description.